I could not believe my orders. This was not possible. Were they to chain a millstone about my neck and toss me into the mill pond, I should be better able to survive. It sounded simple, I suppose. Take Sparrow to Hope's grave. It was the return alive part that was not so simple. Madness. That was the only possibility. Let me explain. Sparrow is a scribe. She is of a size and strength to not even threaten a mouse. She has never faced worse than a bookworm, and they wish me to walk into the lair of the demon callers with her. Keep her alive long enough to find and rummage about a library, then get her out with a book. Perhaps I should also juggle a few drake eggs. Maybe tame a dragon to ride there? Hope's grave. Imagine a place so horrid that people lose the will to live just approaching it. Hope's grave is that place. The demon callers were supposed to have been wiped out after the death of the she-witch. Instead, they exploded in power. My order was cast out of the country after what should have been our greatest victory. We had liberated them from the most vile demon caller to have ever existed. Then the very land itself had twisted and turned against us. The demons seemed to pour from every shadow and crack, and in the very center lays the fortress city called Hope's Grave. Not one of our order could say what it looked like inside, for none had survived coming within a league of the place. There were people in those walls, an oddity, as they alone seemed immune to the ravages of the demons. Were every member of our order to gather, we could not storm this fortress, demon-built and demon-defended. We had only the fortune that the she-witch had not built it before we got her. Her heir was a male that was just as cruel and twice as cunning. Under his rule, the country had not only rejected us, but was pushing into our own country. From the infected land came plagues and twisted creatures that rampaged along our border. There was a devastated no-man's land now almost a day's ride across, between that blighted country and ours. Now Sparrow had offered the first ray of light against the darkness, but she needed an ancient text which only 2 copies existed, one in the far lands of the golden-skinned scholars. But such a journey would take years, and to gain access to the book might take even more years. We did not have that time. She had uncovered a single thread and chased it down. The second copy had been taken by the she-witch. It would now be in the fortress. We needed the book, for it explained the way to seal off the demons once and for all. Deception would be called for, which grated against my principle. We were to dress and act as travelers from elsewhere. A man and his sister. Anything else would have been inappropriate. I was newly married, and to call Sparrow my wife would have been a vile lie. Even calling her sister bothered me. We of the Order must be truthful. We must hold our honor above all else. Sparrow belonged in the cloistered safety of women's quarters. Yet I would be taking her out into the cruel world. I would be exposing her to strangers and possible slander against her when we returned. She was brave, I finally admitted. She risked her possible marriage prospects, but she was a dull little thing to look at, and her frail frame did not bode well for bearing strong sons. Maybe she had already accepted that there would be no marriage offer for her. Yes, I could call her sister, for her only path in the future would be a holy sister. It took over a month to gain the proper clothing, and a battered-looking cart, and a dusty-colored mule. Twice, I was in meetings with Sparrow attending. She never spoke or looked up. A proper pious woman, at least. Her notes were detailed, small and precise handwriting with no flourishes. The council shuffled through them and asked questions. Always she was able to point out the proper page with the answer. No reason for her to speak aloud. She was dull as a sparrow, I thought. Washed-out blue eyes that rarely looked up, dust-colored hair and pale skin, bone-thin body with no curves. Even her hands were bony and ink-stained. I could think of nothing save her pious nature and intelligence to relieve her dullness. Neither was a sought trait in a wife. So yes, she would one day be assigned as a holy sister. Maybe not the preferred state for a woman, but at least she would never be cast out to fend for herself. All too soon I was stripped of my armor, of my weapons, and sitting on a wooden bench that rattled every bone in my body, made for a disquieting sensation. The mule had only one gait, a plodding walk so slow I could have outpaced it at a leisurely stroll. Sparrow sat hands in lap on the bench beside me. Not till we reached the Deadlands did she ever show interest in looking about. I had nothing to speak with her about, so our days were mostly silent. Evening was soon routine, setting up a tent for her against the wagon. I attended the mule while she made a small fire and started simple meals. We had travel fare for the midday meal. She sat a pot with porridge in the ashes each night to make our breakfast fast and simple come morning. I had not wished to camp in the Deadlands, but we had timed it badly, and my choice was make camp in the Deadlands or at night in enemy territory. This camp was different. Maybe she was nervous, I thought. The stew scorched as she was distracted going over notes. Her eyes had a frantic look, and she kept glancing about as if trying to get her bearings. I knew that she had been born in the woman's quarter. Never had she seen this land, so what was she seeking in it? Tomorrow we would be inside the enemy territory. Would she be able to handle the risks there? A solid week till we reached Hope's grave. There I would act as a simple refugee trying to find a better home in the South. My sister would petition for access to the library to research southern routes and lands. A long shot, I thought, but if she could be allowed peacefully in the library, she could search for the book. Pray all that has mercy that the book was not separated and under lock and key. While I found her dedication to research admirable, I was not happy with her distracted state. At last I reprimanded her to attend first to her duties. She looked up at me with those washed-out eyes and blinked owlishly. "I am. You have ruined the meal." I pointed to the stew that had been ignored. "I am not a cook, nor have I learned more of cooking than chop and toss in a pot. If it is not fit for eating, there is travel bread still." She returned to the thick book she was scribing in. I stood gaped-mouthed and looked at her. Had a demon possessed her? Where had this attitude come from? "Maiden Sparrow, this land is dangerous. Attend your proper tasks that we may keep watch." "I am attending my proper tasks. Do you know the correct roads to travel to the settlements?" "There is only Hope's grave, and it's a straight shot." "Only if you're an army invading. Thicket Hollow will be where we spend tomorrow night. The village is mostly hunters and scouts. Crude hamlet, but first stop for refugees traveling from the north, such as we are supposed to be." I had never heard of such a place. Everyone knew the only place the demons did not roam was Hope's grave. But her map did show a tiny cluster of buildings. The map was far different than any I had ever seen. According to it, there were an abundance of small hamlets and villages. Well, we would see who was right when we were off track and delayed. To my shock, we arrived at a small cluster of buildings near hidden in a valley. No inn, but one of the families welcomed us to stay with them. Sparrow seemed a bit more vibrant as she told stories to the children, although the adults also seemed to welcome the entertainment. They were oddly welcoming, congratulating me on navigating past the zealots and arriving safe with my sister. From here they assured me things would be easier. Who were these zealots they spoke of? And easier in a land infested with demons? I did have to admit, the presence of walls and other people did relieve some of my fears. How had she found a map detailing these settlements? As far as I had heard, no one could survive this far outside of the city fortress. Yet her map again and again led us to safe nests of people. Again and again we spent an eve among people that were cheered to have tales and visitors. It was strange to be among both women and men in the same room, and with children underfoot. Of an eve there was a strict segregation among my order. Women and children would retire after evening meal to their quarter, men to barracks. Husbands that wished time with their wives would retire to apartments for the evening. and it was chaos. Women laughing, men joking, children racing. Sparrow seemed not to mind it in the least. If anything, she seemed to welcome the chaos. But she was used to children and chattering women. Within these dark lands, Sparrow seemed to come to life somehow. She would carry messages from the previous settlement and offer to carry any onward. I lent little to our ruse, simply the man who dealt with the mule. On the hidden road she was almost rude. I several times had to bite back reprimands of her actions. No longer did I think her suitable as a holy sister. She was far too bold of tongue and mind. These peasants had given her the most atrocious habits. It was not a settlement, but something called a wayfarer's station we stopped at that evening. A single small building with a stable attached. Now it made more sense why she had gotten a basket of food in the last town. She was hurried as if she wished to be abed, and the night over sooner for it. She was eager to make Hope's grave before the sun reached its high point. I was less anxious to approach that foul nest. I made a small fire in the pit, disliking the darkness. While we had not seen a single demon on these back roads, I was still wishing to keep a close watch. The morning would find us within sight of the cursed fortress city. I would be the first of the order to be within those walls, and I muttered prayers over and over. I would leave with some knowledge of the place for my brothers. Sparrow ceased pacing with a sigh and settled opposite of me. She began what I could only call a prayer, kneeling, bringing her hands up in a dance. If you wish to be made whole, first let yourself be broken. If you wish to be made straight, first allow yourself to be twisted. If you wish to truthfully see, first let yourself become blind. If you wish to become full, first allow yourself to become hollow. Never had I heard such a prayer, but it did seem to calm her. She knelt with hands now resting on her knees, palms up and fingers relaxed. It didn't seem a proper prayer. Maybe it was something women were taught to calm themselves down. I did not know women had separated prayers. Her smile was not comforting. You know little of women. Her laugh was low and something wicked to it. Such words would never be uttered in the women's quarters, for fear of the matrons thinking them blasphemy, as well as being lazy to sit still. Something you read then in a book? Something I was taught long ago. She looked up at me, and I wondered how I had found her eyes washed out before. They were like blue fire, clear and bright. A good thing I learned such meditation. Life in the women's prison is a test of patience. It is not a prison. Women must be kept safely from harm, safe from the lustful temptations and sinful thoughts. Women must be guarded and protected even from themselves, for they are frail and given to flightly temperaments. I repeated what I had been taught without thought. You mean women must be kept from knowing they can have a choice, that they can be more than broodmares to spread their legs on command, to cook, clean, and wash up after the men. She smiled that predatory smile again. We poor flighty women know far more than you realize. We know who is tired of his wife, which have decided they want to take their wives to the devastated lands for a lesson in thankfulness. We know who has started looking at the maids for a new wife. We know who prefers to use his fists on his wife, because his cock cannot harden with a woman. Do you wonder why so many greet us as lucky to have made it through the land of the zealots? Your own order? Do you wonder where the true owners of our stolen clothing and wagon are? Shock. I was open-mouthed staring at her. Never would a woman speak as such. Never would... Demon. It was tiny, but there was a demon sitting on her shoulder, half hidden in her hair. One of the implings, barely taller than her own hand's span. Then it wasn't there. Was I imagining demons in every shadow now? Wagon approaching. Save your outrage for another time. She was right. Another wagon approached slowly. I rose, worried till I saw them. A couple and their daughter, all looking about ready to drop of exhaustion. I helped him with his horse while Sparrow made a tea for the two women. They ate quickly and seemed cheered at the fire and tea. The daughter was old enough to be a wife and mother. I frowned that she traveled with her parents openly. Customs here were barbaric, I reminded myself, and as soon as I was able, I would need to correct Sparrow. Such manners would not be accepted when we returned. At least, here I could correct it before her reputation was tarnished. Philip and Bess had been visiting family and were returning home. Company for the rest of the journey was eagerly welcomed. Although Bess kept looking at Sparrow with a faint frown. What was she seeing? Would it give us away? The man offered we could petition for a place within the town. Refugees were always welcome there. Yes, I thought, as demon fodder. Forgive me, dear girl, but you bring me to thoughts of a happier time. Your eyes are much as hers. Never before or since have I seen such eyes. Sparrow shook her head. I find nothing to forgive. But may I ask, though, of what you speak? The woman lifted her hand to stroke her own daughter's hair. Nan here is my fourth child, and only one to live through the hag's rule. She was born 3 years before we were freed. 2 short years before those zealots from the north swept in and murdered our beloved queen. Our guides allowed me to ask questions freely. I honestly could not think of what she spoke of. Was it not my own country that lay directly north? Had it not been us who had liberated them, killing that she-witch that had so terrorized them? Rather, the tale they told as Sparrow stared at me with a strange smirk was different. She-witch, or the hag, as they called her. No one wished to speak her name anymore, speak evil to invite it. She had come to power in a vicious coup. Best described how every family had their firstborn children, even infants, taken from them and murdered. The choice was obey or lose the rest of their children. Her next 2 daughters would also be taken as soon as they became maidens. Rescue came from a source none could expect. A blood slave, bound to the hag. Something that supposedly could not betray her. Something that could not even speak to another without the hag's permission. But the current lord had realized something. The slave was not in the least willing, nor was she helpless. He heard what she could not give voice to. The slave had figured out a way to break the hag's bonds on her, and was furious enough to risk it. Without the power of her blood slave, the hag had fallen to the current lord. This made no sense to me. We had killed the she-witch. We had rescued them, at least until the current monster had taken control. Bess continued. For 2 years there had been peace and joy. The Lord had taken the former blood slave for his wife, and hope had shone brightly in the darkness. Not the soulless monster she had been created as, rather a daughter to every mother who had shed tears. Then those religious zealots had stormed in, murdering beasts that swarmed into the castle and slaughtered her, hence the name of the fortress city being Hope's Grave. None of this could be true, yet I heard the venom and sorrow in her voice. Again she looked at Sparrow. Blue fire eyes. Only Hope ever had them, I thought. Will grieve the Lord to see such eyes again. Never has he forgotten her. Never has he forgiven them. Never should he forgive them. The women slept within the shelter. Philip and I were to take turns on watch. He apologized for his wife, saying that Hope's murder had broken something in his wife, broken something in all of them. I welcomed my watch for the silence it gave. Could it be that we had acted too late? Had we killed an innocent woman? No, we had defeated a demon caller, a she-witch. We had liberated them. Just before the sun rose, right as the sky bled with false dawn, the demons came. Massive beasts that swarmed down and surrounded us. The tradesman was confused, but not frightened. His wife and daughter the same. Must be one of those northern bastards in the area. Just be calm. They will not harm strangers. Aye, there is, Philip. Standing beside you, thinking he could hide his stench in borrowed clothing and mule dung. The voice called out from the darkness. "Lord Tristan?" The man looked at me in confusion. I drew my sword from its hiding place. I would die to the demons, but maybe I could get a blow in against the monstrous lord, as well as save Sparrow and the other 2 women from his notice. He was tall, lank gray hair, and hard-featured, still strong-built in spite of his age. His sword broke mine with a sickening sound. He was faster than I expected, too. He had me backed up against the wagon within minutes. "Why, you cowardly lot, keep trying to invade and attack my people, I cannot understand. Come to rescue the women your lot keep abandoning on our border, or come to finish the job you expected the demons to do? Come to steal our maidens for your so-called holy sisters?" His voice had fury, and his storm-gray eyes were hard as steel. "Tris, let him go, beloved." We both froze. His visage, that had been twisted into a growl, became slack with shock. His eyes told a story in seconds. Surprise, wanting to believe, fearful to look and be disproved. Then looking forward, Sparrow, who stood in the first rays of dawn. Those blue fire eyes were nothing natural, I now saw, and her hair was shining golden bright. "How?" The sword he had pressed me against the wagon with clattered to the ground. "I held your body." "I told you that if you held true, I would defeat even death and remain beside you." Sparrow smiled at him. "Just didn't think I'd be reborn among those bastards that killed me. A balance, I guess. They took my life, so they had to give me life." He released me and stumbled toward her, falling to his knees and wrapping arms about her waist. His shoulders heaved and convulsed as his face was buried against her chest. She ran hands through his gray strings of hair. I had a chance as I grabbed his sword. A final ending to this nightmare, only to find the sword was taken from my grasp by a thing that stood half as tall as I and looked like it was made of metal. She looked at me and shook her head with a frown as she made soft cooing sounds to the man. Oddly, where her fingers stroked his hair, it became softer looking, new minted gold replacing the tarnished gray. Bess hugged her daughter and watched as one seeing a miracle. "She has been returned to us, Nan. She's come home." Sparrow nodded and smiled at her. "Poor foolish knight. You wondered why I knew this land so well? Why you saw no demon? Because I know this land. I am connected to it as no other. What you call demons are merely elemental spirits, neither good nor evil of their own accord. Yes, they can be used for ill, but they can be bound to tasks such as guard the land and its people. As I was bound to evil, so could I, and they be bound to good. With a name, Tristan stole me from Ravenna and bound me to him, at least till your lot decided they could not handle someone not falling in worship to your supposed god. But I was bound not just to him, but to the very land, also to every mother whose murdered daughter bled to power Ravenna's spell, and what she bound nameless, they freed with a single word spoken over and over. Hope! Bess was crying freely now. Her husband moved to comfort her. Lord Tristan told us to name her, so we named her Hope. He stood, and it was shocking to see the difference. 2 decades had fallen from the Lord's body as he traced fingertips along the edge of her face, stroked hair that curled soft against his calloused fingers. Not near so easy. But the binding was cleaved in 2, and she gave to me her trust that I may save her, save this land and our people. How could I not remain true to my dear one? This was not the girl I had started off with. Though still willow, thin and tiny, she was no longer dull. Rather, she was radiant with power, power she had been regaining from this land. No wonder she had become more and more willful as we spent time here. Tristan moved to be behind her, holding her close to him, his chin brushed against her hair. His face was noble now. There was a pride in his tear-brightened eyes. There was a possessiveness that was terrifying as well. "My fierce little queen, I take it you have something planned?" He chuckled and brushed a kiss against the top of her head. "Yes, although the plan was to come to you within the Hall of Silence. I should have realized you would know the moment one of his sort was close. And really, you came all alone out here?" "I had my servants with me." He waved a hand to the assorted demons. "Alone." She chided him with a boldness I could not believe. Bess chuckled and Philip tried to hide the amusement he also felt. She made a soft sound, and that impling I had glimpsed earlier appeared. She concentrated on it for a moment, then she smiled and it vanished off. Something appeared a moment later that might have resembled a horse, save the claws instead of hooves, and the fact that it was scaled. "For bringing me safely back to where I belong, you may return home unharmed. Balance will be restored, so long as your order remains out of our lands. I give to you this, also. I curse you to open your eyes and to love your daughter. Return and tell them you traded a virgin bride for your safety and the release of the curse upon your lands." I didn't wish to get on the beast, but the choice was made for me by the demon that still held the sword. It plopped me onto the creature's back as a sack of oats. The beast had shot off at a speed that had me clinging tight to the strap that I guessed was put there for that very reason. A journey that had taken close to a week was over before nightfall. I stood on the border of our lands, with not much more than a water skin and my clothes, shaking and uncertain of what had happened. I had survived a meeting with the demon lord. I had brought a demoness to him to be his wife, one that had been born within our own quarters. A patrol found me, and I was hard-pressed at first to prove my identity, nearly ending up conscripted to the mines. Over and over I had to explain everything. "Do you wonder where the true owners of our stolen clothing and wagon are?" Her words kept coming to mind. In the cell I learned what happened to strangers caught in our lands, conscripted to labor mines or farms. Children young enough to be malleable were sent to one of the halls. Unwed women were sent to become holy sisters in service to the religious section of our order, a fate far different than the life of quiet devotion I thought it would be. By the time I was restored, I had a tale for the council. I could after all not tell them the truth. A virgin for the breaking of the curse. There were chuckles at that statement, a comment of it was a good thing that I had been the one sent, so there was a virgin to be given. In their eyes, Sparrow was no loss. I could see that they still were thinking of how best to subdue the nation, to take over those lands. "We know who prefers to use his fists on his wife." Why had I never seen the bruises, the flinching, the shying away? Even my own sweet-tempered wife was reluctant to be touched, I found. She would lie down and close her eyes, prepared to do her duty. The closeness I had seen in the villages, the tangible bond I had seen between the demon lord and Sparrow was missing. She died near 5 years after my return in childbirth. Never was I able to form a true connection with her. She gave me my only single child, a daughter, the Sparrow had said I would have, the light of my life. Although it was frowned upon to coddle children, to have much of anything to do with them, I spent as much time as I could with my little girl. By the time she was 14, she was a beauty, black hair and bright eyes. One of my commanders noticed it and informed me he had decided to have her betrothed to his son. I should have been pleased with such a good match, but I knew the boy, who was a handful of years older. A cruel and callous boy, who thought himself to be a man. I caught him tormenting her one day and scolded him. He glared up at me. "She's to be my wife. I can do whatever I want with her." He was right. I could see now, as I had been cursed to do so. Sparrow had caused me to be aware of the horrors that women were subjected to, and my love for my daughter had me chilled to the bone at the thought of her being subjected to the same. And the rest is for those who need a happy ever after to their stories. It was a nightmare that gave me hope. a memory of being pressed against the wagon, of the demon lord snarling something at me. "Come to rescue the women your lot keep abandoning on our border." I knew now that some men would take their wives out to show them the harshness of the devastated lands, to supposedly put the fear and obedience back into their souls. Some wives did not return. His words suggested that the women were not lost, but had been found and saved. Could I make it back to Thicket Hollow? Could I have my sweet child spirited away to Sparrow? Would she take the child? I had to try. I took her on a pilgrimage as soon as I could arrange it. Rather, I raced as fast as I could to get to the border nearest where I thought the hunting village was. She was scared at first and questioned, but such a sturdy little soul. I asked her if she was brave enough to take the risk, if she really wished to remain in the women's quarters. She bit her lip, wanting to say yes to please me, but it was in her eyes. The chance at freedom made her cry. I hugged her close. There was a woman I knew once. She told me I would have a daughter I loved. She was right. I love you enough to send you to her. My daughter shrieked and pointed. Two of those horse things had appeared, and from one a tiny impling leapt down and raced toward us, holding a roll of paper with a ribbon waving from it as a flag. It chattered and waved it toward me to take. I comforted my daughter and took the note. The impling began a series of antics that had her laughing at it. "I thought they were supposed to be huge and mean." She then glanced at the mounts with a frown. Again I smiled at her. "It's an impling, and I've seen it, and the mounts before too. I rode one once." Her eyes stared wide at me. "You did?" "They are very fast." I unrolled the paper. I almost cried at the words. A father that loves his daughter is always welcomed. I unstrapped my sword and tossed it as far as I could, then stripped the saddle and bridle off my own horse. A slap sent it off to find grass. "Do you want me to ride with you, or do you want to try it alone?" She chewed at her lip, then approached one of the demon mounts. It bent to let her climb on, and I vaulted onto the other. Her shriek of laughter rang out as they leapt forward. At a full gallop, they were as smooth a ride as a palfrey at a walk. They seemed to know where to go. We certainly did not steer them as they chased one another along paths I could not see. The fortress walls rose high over us as they dashed into the gate that evening. None seemed to think twice of us while on the two mounts. Within, we saw many other demons at work peacefully alongside the humans. They came to a stop and bent to let us dismount on wobbly legs. Sparrow, no, this was now Hope, stood in the courtyard with a boy beside her, taller than she, but the lanky half-formed build of youth. Two small girls giggled and teased one another on the other side of her, all with sun-gold hair. Her family, come to greet mine. And I did not like the stunned look in the boy's eyes. Hope looked at him, then my daughter, and after frowning for a moment, shook her head and laughed. "Come, old knight. Pipkin told me you were on your way, and I have a small apartment ready for you and your daughter." The boy stuttered slightly, and offered his arm to lead my daughter, who was shyly smiling back at him. The twin girls were racing about, the pair asking questions with no pause for answers. "So what is my future daughter-in-law named?" I stumbled. "She is a child still." "I thought you could see clearly now." "Will not be soon, but look at 'em. Will be no matter our wishes." Mercy. She was right. There was something there just as clear as it was between Hope and Tristan. She turned 14 last winter. Aurum. He turns 17 come spring. Will be a long 4 years, I think, for all of us. So, the would-be mule tender returns. I knew that deep voice and froze. Behave, love. I need to make sure our son has a chaperone for the next few years. Tristan looked a bit confused, an eyebrow lifting. Why would he need such? Too late. Hope had vanished out of a door. He looked to me with a curious look. Do you know what she's going on about? I think she wishes to be a mother-in-law before she is a grandmother. For a fearsome demon lord, he could be most easily surprised. His lips parted, but the words had tangled and turned silent. I have a daughter named Mercy. So what sort of boy is your son, seeing as Hope thinks the two will be a pair? Tristan's laugh was rich and amused sounding. It actually calmed me. Mule tender, have you met my son's mother? I believe you used to call her Sparrow. What sort of son would you expect her to raise? I smiled and offered him my hand, one I will be happy to trust my daughter with. He and I went to a balcony overlooking a garden. There below the young couple walked side by side, and I heard Tristan sigh. Fate has a wicked sense of humor, I begin to think. Hope returned, followed by the twins.
Who are you? Where did you come from? Do you really know Mama?
They were as active and curious as kittens. Settle down, little ones, and I will tell you a tale of a foolish knight and a brave little sparrow. I sat down on a bench, and they swarmed to me with the trust that loved children have. Hope smiled at me and slipped an arm about Tristan's waist. She had cursed me with a blessing, I realized now.